Okay, let's talk about something we do every single day, but almost never really think about: communication. How do we actually understand each other? What does it take for a single word or even a single glance to have any meaning at all? We're going to dive into this because the answer is way, way bigger and honestly, so much cooler than you probably think. We all have this really simple picture in our heads of how communication works. It's something we're taught early on, and it makes sense, right? But what if I told you that simple picture isn't just incomplete, it's fundamentally wrong? We think of it like this neat little package. A sender sends a message. A receiver gets it. Boom. Done. A straight line. But the reality? Oh, it's so much messier. It's more like a giant tangled web. A single message only makes sense because it exists inside this massive network of shared history, context, and all sorts of cultural baggage. And this simple, flawed way of thinking, it actually has a name, and it gets right to the heart of the problem. It's called the Robinson Crusoe mistake. Just think about it this way. If you wanted to understand how all of human society works, would you just go study one guy, Robinson Crusoe, all alone on his island? Of course not. That's absurd. You'd miss everything. The whole system that gives an individual meaning in the first place. And it's the exact same for communication. That's the core idea here. That simple sender-receiver model, it's just not a working system on its own. It's like having a car with no road. For it to actually work, it has to be, and this is a direct quote, immersed in semiotic space. Without that immersive environment of meaning, a message is just noise. So what on earth is this semiotic space that everything has to be immersed in? Well, it's got a pretty cool name: the semiosphere. The semiosphere is the total universe of science and meaning that a culture lives in. And here's the best way to get it. Just like life on Earth cannot exist outside of the biosphere, our atmosphere, our oceans, the whole system, while meaning and communication cannot exist outside of the semiosphere. And this isn't just some fluffy comparison. The guy who actually came up with the whole biosphere concept, Vladimir Vernadsky, he argued that every living thing is basically a function of that larger system. And it's the exact same idea for culture. Every single conversation, every poem, every meme is a function of its semiosphere. Okay, so when you hear universe or system, you might be picturing something clean and organized, right? Like a library with all the books neatly arranged on shelves. You gotta throw that idea right out the window. The first and most important thing to get about the semiosphere is that it is anything but uniform. It's radically heterogeneous. In other words, it's a jumble, a mix, a beautiful, chaotic mess. What do we mean by that? Well, inside this one space, you have countless different languages all operating at the same time. And I'm not just talking about English or Spanish. Art is a language. Fashion is a language. The slang your kids use, political jargon, religious texts, they're all in there. And the crazy part is, they are all evolving at completely different speeds. Fashion can change in a season. A religious text can stay the same for 1,000 years. Here's a fantastic mental image for you. Picture a huge museum hall, but it's not organized by period or style. You've got ancient statues right next to modern art, inscriptions and languages you can read next to ones that are totally mysterious. Now add in the museum staff, the tourists, the don't touch signs, all of that together, buzzing as one single, chaotic, functioning space. That's the semiosphere. And this is where culture gets really wild, and so different from biological evolution. In biology, when a species goes extinct, it's gone. Poof! But in the semiosphere, old texts, old ideas, they can lie dormant for centuries and then suddenly roar back to life, more relevant than ever. I mean, think about it. Shakespeare can feel more alive today than some forgotten novelist from the 1950s. The past is never really past. So if this whole thing is such a chaotic mess, how does any given culture hold together? How does it have any kind of shared identity? Well, it tries to tidy up. It does this by writing an official story about itself. You see, the semiosphere isn't a democracy. It's totally asymmetrical. There's this cultural core, a dominant center, that tries to organize everything else. This is where you find the official norms, the high culture, the proper way of doing things. And then all the other stuff, subcultures, folk traditions, slang, it all gets pushed out to the edges. And to manage all this diversity and stop things from flying apart, that cultural core creates its official story. It's basically a rule book, a grammar that describes how things are supposed to be. And here's how that process works, step by step. First, that dominant group at the core just describes its own reality, its art, its language. Then that description gets promoted. It becomes the official grammar for the entire culture. Third, it tries to impose those rules on the whole messy system. And then, step 4, and this is the absolute kicker, anything that doesn't fit into that official story is simply declared non-existent. Now, this might sound abstract, but it has chilling, real-world consequences. Take this example from the 12th century. There was a writer, Andreas Capellanus, who literally wrote the book on chivalrous courtly love, yet he argued it was perfectly fine to assault a peasant girl. His reasoning? In the official story of his culture, in his world picture, she and her world simply didn't count. They, as it were, did not exist. And this right here, this explains why we are constantly rediscovering forgotten artists, writers, and thinkers from history. It's not that they were just misplaced or that people accidentally forgot about them. No, they were actively excluded from the official story of their time. They were declared non-existent until a later culture with a different grammar could finally see them. So this leads us to the final and honestly the most essential piece of this whole puzzle. What actually holds this chaotic semiosphere together and gives it any kind of identity? It all comes down to one thing: the boundary. So here's the bottom line. The unity of a culture comes from the act of drawing a line in the sand. A boundary. A boundary that separates everything that is us on the inside from everything that is them or not us on the outside. And this is the ultimate takeaway. A culture's identity isn't just about what it includes in its official story. It's defined just as much, maybe even more, by what it actively excludes, what it pushes outside the boundary of meaning and declares to be foreign, wrong, or simply non-existent. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question to think about, doesn't it? If every culture defines itself by creating an official story and excluding whatever doesn't fit, what parts of our own world, what voices, ideas, and people are being pushed outside the boundary today? What are we right now declaring to be non-existent?